Did I already make you a co-host? Yes, I already did. So you should be able to share your screen. And Spencer, I am just recording this as well because one of the key things that we do is we record the presentations and then share them with through the proceedings for people who couldn't make the call in person.
See. So I assume everybody can see that?
Yeah, it's all coming up. Yeah, perfect.
And you don't see my speaking notes.
I do not see your speaking notes. See the slides. Perfect.
Perfect. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here today to speak with everybody just a little bit about the ongoing electricity procurements that are in Ontario right now. We've seen some last year. We're likely to see more in the future. And as well, I'd like to especially highlight the work that AMO has been doing to support municipalities in having discussions around these projects and working to fulfill the role that the province has given them. I'm hoping now everybody, we're not on the title slide anymore, right? We're on perfect. I've never done this before, so over Zoom. So just want to make sure. So before I get into AMO's work supporting municipalities, I do want to start with just a few words on the provincial energy demand forecast to really help anchor why municipal involvement in the energy space is becoming increasingly important. You might have heard this number, forecasted 75% increase in electricity demand is needed to meet housing and economic growth and electrification over the next 24 years. Important context, this 75% already takes into account a 15% reduction in demand through continued provincial investment in energy efficiency programs. It's also important to underline that the 75% is only for Ontario's domestic needs. It does not take into account energy exports to the US, and so it's unlikely to be significantly directly impacted by changes in trade and tariff negotiations. We know that in order to meet this demand, Ontario needs to expand its generation and electrical storage capacity. And simply put, these projects have to be built somewhere, and municipalities have been assigned a key role in determining whether to host projects proposed for their communities and in overseeing the development applications where projects move forward. And it is very important to underline the opportunity this growth represents. The province frames the increase for just the new industrial demand, that portion of that 75% just for industrial demand, as being enough to add a new city the size of Toronto to the power grid. But I want to encourage you to think of it a different way. That would be the equivalent of taking 11 towns of Innisfil and growing them to the size of London, or 9 Hearsts and growing them to the size of Kingston. And the potential growth for new homes and other businesses represents a tremendous economic opportunity for municipalities that are willing to rise to the challenge to meet this demand. In addition to the growth and the assessment growth that will go along with it, there's an opportunity to use community benefit agreements to generate non-property tax revenue for municipalities willing to be host communities for these generation and storage projects. And I'll speak a little bit about that further into the presentation. So what do we know? We know that the province has directed the IESO to go procure this generation and storage capacity. And we know that this is taking the form of a series of competitive procurements, including the long-term or LT procurements. In this context, the LT long-term simply means that the length of time from when a project is approved to a project is brought online takes a long time. It's about 5 years. Over the past year, we saw LT1 and an expedited LT1 process bring 25 battery sites and 5 gas generation sites online. And for those who didn't have a project in your community come forward, these battery energy storage sites are quite literally what they sound like. They're large battery facilities that are able to draw energy from the power grid when demand is low, and then feed that energy back into the grid when demand is high. And the reason that this is important is it helps make sure that when we're at peak demand and or near our generation capacity, we don't have rolling brownouts because we have some energy in supply. For moving forward, we're anticipating an LT2 or long-term intake 2, which is planned over the next few years. We're expecting 4 intakes over a couple different streams. And you'll hear terms thrown around like energy resources, capacity resources. All those really mean at the end of the day is it's for both projects that generate energy and projects that store energy. We also know that these procurements are going to be technology agnostic, which means it could be any type of project. So it could be wind or solar or gas generation. And for the storage, it could be battery storage, it could be other types of storage. All of these are open, which is a marked departure from what you may have experienced last year with LT1, where it was very restricted to just battery storage sites and gas generation. So what's their municipal role in all of this? Over the last few years, dating as far back as the Green Energy Act, if you remember back then, the province has responded to municipal sector feedback and put in requirements that projects under the upcoming procurements only move forward with municipal approval. This means in order for a project to receive a contract from the IESO, the municipality has to have a role in reviewing and approving them. A notable change from the previous LT1 procurement is before a developer shows up at your council with a proposed project seeking your support, they have to do what's called a pre-engagement, which means they're notifying you early in advance. They're telling you they intend to submit a request for support. And this is going to give an opportunity for municipalities and the developers to engage before any formal proposal is put forward. This gives municipalities a really good opportunity early on to identify what their local expectations are for the projects, what kind of questions and answers they need to facilitate their decision-making process, set expectations about the timelines and the process for development applications, or to move forward for council approval, and to set clear expectations about what community engagement needs to be conducted. And so this is the first stage of several where municipalities have an opportunity to weigh in. Following that is the formal municipal support confirmation stage. You may have heard about these municipal support resolutions. They were previously called. The name is likely to change under LT2 because we like to make sure our acronyms change on a regular basis in Ontario. Importantly, I think there was a lot of confusion around what was being requested with the last round of procurements. And there was a misunderstanding that if you give a support resolution up front, that means that the municipality is guaranteeing that they will give all approval to that project, right down to site plan and building permits. And it's important to note that that's not actually the case. All the support resolution is a support in principle to express that you're a willing host for that particular project. With the understanding that that project is not guaranteed to move forward because there are other approvals that have to come afterwards. These resolutions, in addition to just being the first step along the way where a municipality can say we are a willing host for this project, it also gives an opportunity to outline any local requirements for support, such as before we approve it, we need to see an emergency plan, we want to see the site plan, we want to negotiate a community benefit agreement, and all these things are a condition of our support. Once that resolution is done, we go to the next stage of approval, which is where the developer submits their proposal with the municipal resolution to the IESO, and the IESO goes through their own review process to determine whether or not they want to move forward with a contract to fund the project. There's no role for municipalities at this stage, but I want to just highlight that it's not every project that receives local support that's going to move forward, which is why they've sort of split it up into these two parts. Is the IESO wants to make sure before they're even considering something that the municipality is in principle willing to host it, and then only if the IESO thinks that that project meets their criteria to meet provincial demand, then we'll move to a formal development process. And that's the last step, which gets lumped all together into a big bucket that the IESO typically calls downstream approvals. And you'll be a lot more familiar with this if you're in a municipality, because this is really just the regular development process, the same as would go through any other development, housing, a new factory, a farm, any kind of development that has to go through that land use and zoning process, any of your local approvals, site planning, environmental assessments. That's all still required after the support resolution, after IESO has approved the contract. In addition, all of the provincial approvals that go into all those regular developments, those are all still in place, as well as some additional provincial approvals specific to energy projects, which is just to say that municipalities are not alone in making sure that when we're reviewing these projects that they're safe and that they're appropriate fits for the host communities. And so while we recognize that This development and approval process is just the same on paper as any other that a municipality might receive. We do know that these energy projects often attract a lot of community attention, some positive, some negative, and they often use technologies that municipal staff don't have experience reviewing or that are frankly just new and sort of groundbreaking. And so while these projects need to come with an appropriate level of scrutiny, we want to make sure that municipalities are effective partners and are not perceived as unnecessarily blocking progress by asking the right questions to make sure these projects are the right fit. And so at AMO, we've been doing some work to make sure municipalities can be confident, engaging in energy discussions, supporting energy projects that make sense, and fully sharing in the significant economic benefits that will be realized by the energy developers in the province as these projects move forward. And with that, I'm happy to share with you the AMO Municipal Energy Procurement Toolkit, which is a resource that we've put together. It's available live now on our website to provide guidance on the municipal role in procurements, the potential costs and benefits of hosting projects, and key considerations for municipalities who are reviewing these proposed projects. It also includes links to resources on land use and site planning, emergency management, agricultural and environmental protection, and project decommissioning, as well as a section on guidance for negotiating community benefit agreements so that municipalities can share in revenue that these projects are going to bring to the developers. We developed this toolkit with input from elected officials, municipal staff, including CAOs, planners, and project managers, all of whom have direct experience with energy projects in their communities. And it's also been informed by discussion with AMO's Land Use Planning and Resources Task Force. And we had a great partnership from the IESO and several provincial ministries to make sure that where we're providing resources and where we're providing guidance, it links to the most up-to-date relevant guidance from the province for municipalities so that you can use this guide not only to get a sense of what are the types of questions you should ask, but also what resources are out there to help you answer questions, determine if the information you're being given by the developers is accurate, and that you're following all of the processes that the province has in place. Our intent is really to just help equip municipalities with expert advice and give some best practices to inform local decision-making and negotiations with energy developers. It can also provide a resource to share with developers so that they can prepare themselves for a conversation with the municipalities by taking the time to better understand what kind of information they need to be able to provide when they're seeking municipal support. And so just a few examples of the type of information in this guide. I would say that when you get into the guide, it's obviously in a lot more detail than what is on the screen. And as I mentioned, there's links to a number of expert resources as well. So, first and foremost, looking at the engagement, I mentioned that the LT2 developers are required to do a pre-engagement, and that this is an opportunity to really set the tone of the discussion, set those expectations up front. And so we've been able to include in the guide a lot of information about what sorts of things that developers should be able to bring to the table, but as well what municipalities are probably going to need to be able to communicate to the developers up front. And this is simple things for us that are often new for the developers. What's the process to bring an item to a standing committee or a council? What does your development process look like? What are the timelines that they're going to be working within? And what are things that you may not know because it's going to be dependent on the application itself? So we've tried to use the guide to set up municipalities to be able to communicate their needs to the developers to just start those discussions off on the right foot, as well as the developers to be able to come to the municipalities with the right questions and answers. Similarly, land use planning is an area where we heard a lot of feedback that municipalities are not always sure how to incorporate this type of project into an official plan, into a zoning bylaw. And so we've been able to work with municipalities who have gone through these projects and compile a lot of technical resources to help municipalities navigate the discussion, figure out what are your best practices for identifying how to treat an energy project in for example, your zoning bylaw, what type of land should these be located on to help avoid conflict with surrounding uses. And what are the opportunities to communicate sort of those local siting expectations to developers before they arrive with a proposal. And so a great practice we saw with this in a few municipalities is a municipality had, for example, an exhausted aggregate pit, and were able to get the developer to locate a battery site on that aggregate pit instead of on an agricultural site. Then the other top concern we've heard is around emergency and environmental protection. And of course, as part of your regular development process, your developers have to submit an emergency management plan. But one of the best practices we've been able to include in our guide, based on, again, experiences from municipalities that have gone through it, is taking the time to go through that plan and determine, just does our local fire department, for example, have the resources or equipment to respond to an incident? And do we have the local capacity to respond in the event that an incident took place? Some of the municipalities were then able to take that information, go back to the developer and say, we need new equipment, and negotiate with the developer to provide that equipment or to fund the training for the local fire department. So in addition to being able to site their project there, the municipality was able to have a direct benefit by improving the capacity of their fire department. And that's a really useful segue into the last best practice that I'll touch on today, which is community benefit agreements, which are increasingly being recognized as a useful tool where municipalities can generate revenue to offset the costs of these projects and make sure the community benefits from the beyond the assessment growth that they might bring. So the example I just gave around training and equipment for firefighters can of course be extended to other project costs. So a municipality could use a community benefit agreement to have the developer fund the municipality retaining a consultant with energy expertise to help review the project, help review the land use siting, help review the technology being used for the project to determine if it's the right fit in the right place. Some municipalities have also been able to negotiate a fixed payment based on the amount of electricity the project delivers each year, and that would be above and beyond helping the municipality cover any costs that they need to incur to support the project moving forward. So that there is a significant opportunity there for municipalities to sort of grow their revenues along with these developers. And so again, these are just some examples of the best practices, the ideas, the questions, and the resources that are all throughout the guide. And I do want to underline as well that in addition to these things and some of the things in the guide to help guide your discussion about what approval looks like in your community, you're not in it alone. The province does still have a number of additional approvals after the municipality has done their local review. They have a completely separate environmental assessment for energy projects. If it's a natural gas plant, for example, there's a set of reviews separate from that. And so the province is there as well after the municipality to make sure that these projects are reviewed at multiple different levels before a shovel ever goes in the ground. I will also touch very quickly on a second resource we put together. This is a companion to the toolkit, but we've developed it to be from the developer's perspective, to help them understand the importance of early outreach to municipalities, why they need to be better prepared to answer questions, and giving them some best practices about how to do that engagement. And for example, as we've been going out over the last year, engaging with the energy industry, we were hearing questions as fundamental as, who in the municipality do I contact if I have a project that I would like to explore? Why, when I reach out to the town clerk, won't they just put me on the council meeting next week? And so we've been able to bundle up some really helpful information for the developers as well. And again, this information is on our website. You're welcome to refer to it. You're also welcome to share it with any developers who show up at your municipality asking for a project to be supported. And so this last slide I have, these are the links to where you can find the resources on our webpage, as well as a general page with all of AMO's recent energy advocacy, which is not just on procurement, but also other topics like the province's proposed integrated energy plan. In addition to the two items I've discussed today, the developer's guide and the municipal guide, we're also working with the atmospheric fund to create a tool that will help municipalities review, rate, and compare different projects based on locally determined criteria and priorities. So that is a decision support tool that we're hoping will be available early in the spring. And when it comes, we'll be able to add it to our resources page. And then the last thing I just want to underline is that all of the guidance that we've been able to include in these resources is based on feedback feedback from people who have gone through the process and were kind enough to share their experiences and their insights. And so with that in mind, we plan for these resources to be living documents. So as we move through future procurements through LT2, we will update these resources as we hear back with new considerations, new resources, new best practices. And so if any of you have feedback on these documents as you work through them, or if you know materials that benefited your municipality and would be helpful for another municipality, or if you just have something you think AMO should know about related to these procurements or energy, my contact information is on the slide and you're more than welcome to reach out.
Thanks so much, Spencer. Really appreciate all that. And thanks for all this work, because I know municipalities are struggling on trying to figure out what are the questions we should be asking. What do we need to be aware of? What does that approval mean? So thank you for pulling that all together for municipalities. Any questions for Spencer? Yeah, take it away, Patty.
Spencer, I'm just curious, the magnitude and the quantity of the battery storage units. How many are they looking at doing in Ontario? Do you have a sense of that? 100, 1,000, I have no idea the numbers that we're looking at here in the next few years.
I know there's an answer to the question. I don't have it off the top of my head. I know the ISO, rather than give a number of projects total, they've given a total capacity that they want to have stored. So it's going to depend. Some of these projects are quite small, some of them are quite large, and it may look to things like distributed energy resources in future rounds of procurement, right? Where if we can have a subdivision and everybody has an independent battery pack on their home, then we don't need to put a battery storage site on an agricultural site somewhere. So I think the number is going to change. It's fairly significant, if I recall. It's in the thousands of megawatt hours. But in terms of the specific number, I don't know. What I do know is that LT2 is planned to go for 4 intakes, right? So over 4 years, and then presumably there will continue to be procurements after that for more. So that's not to say we're going to see these things pop up everywhere forever. I think what it is worth keeping in mind, though, is that this is something that is new now, but over the next few years, I think we want to make sure municipalities are equipped for this to just become a normal part of your regular development planning.
I had one other question.
I'm glad that doesn't just happen to me, because there's lots of times it happens to me. You know,
it was right there. Sorry. It related to with the number, the size. Oh, I know what it was. So with respect to where these could be going in the province, are they looking more out into the rural lands? Are they trying to find, do they want industrial land in like these cities, Toronto and Ottawa, if there's space there, or are they really trying to get it out into the rural agriculture spaces? Or do you know? Is there
I think they're really trying to have them where municipalities are willing to take them.
Okay.
The two things I would say to that is there are some limitations. Obviously, these things need to be near the transmission infrastructure. If you don't have a high capacity hydro nearby, you can't pull or feed into the grid. The other thing we know about the LT2 procurement process is they have put some restrictions around siting. So certain types of project, ground-mounted solar, for example, is just completely prohibited on prime ag land. But we do know they are giving bonus points to projects that are located in the north, and potentially around crown land as well. So not necessarily in a municipality. So
interesting.
And I guess the other thing I would say is the province has been very receptive to some of the municipal feedback on this. So I spoke a little bit about agricultural impact assessments now being made a very formal part of the
Yeah.
process. That was in direct response to municipal sector, and I'll take credit on behalf of AMO, our advocacy saying we can't plow over all of our prime ag to put in batteries. That doesn't make sense. There's other places to put that. And so that is part of why municipalities have the role in reviewing where do they go, because you have the full authority at the moment to say, no, we're not putting it there.
Right now we have full authority.
Yeah.
But no.
I can't speak to what a future government might do. But again, I think that underlines why we're really trying to support municipalities to be good partners with the province and with the ISO, in not saying yes or no one way or the other, but in, if this is a good fit for our community and we can get some benefit out of it and it's in the right place, let's make sure we have the information we need to be able to make an informed decision, yes, or if it doesn't make sense, an informed decision, no.
Right. And I'm fine with that. I love the idea of the battery storage units being used in old aggregate pits and that when they're there. A great idea to do something with the pit. Good idea. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Patty. Any other questions for Spencer? Oh, Kim, take it away.
Thanks, Gabby and Spencer. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. And this is just a quick question about building goodwill for these projects in your community and having the time to do consultation similar to other land use projects. For energy procurement, are you aware if the land use approval falls under the strong mayor policies that municipalities have been bestowed? Mainly related to housing, and I'm just not certain if other projects fall under that land use.
Off the top of my head, I can't say yes or no, and part of the reason for that is it's a question we've asked the province, and we're waiting for some thoughts on. I think it's a tricky one. Strong mayor powers, it's provincial priorities, and they can define that in different ways through regulation. But it also depends on what steps of the approval process are there.
It's interesting. So you have that question pending with your provincial counterparts? Okay, thank you.
Stop that. Hold on. Oh, all right. Any other questions for Spencer? So I did, just if you're thinking I did want to kind of give a little reminder. This has been a topic on battery storage that many municipalities have been raising, like how do we make these decisions on what makes for a kind of a leading practice on, or what are the right questions to be asking energy developers? What do we need to be taking into consideration? How do we take into consideration the risks and vulnerabilities and the opportunities that it presents? So all of those kind of things. We also brought in Energy Storage Canada, who is speaking to some of the leading practices and the work that they've done with fire chiefs across Ontario on building fire firefighters. Sorry, that was the word I was looking for. Firefighters kind of a capacity on managing battery projects, and kind of really making sure that the decisions are based on real risks as opposed to perceived risks associated with these projects as well. So I did want to give a shout out. That's a lot of the resources and the presentation that was provided by Energy Storage Canada. And I also wanted to give a little bit of a heads up that we're going to be coming to the Ontario Climate Caucus. We're just in the process of finalizing up a landowner's guide to local energy projects. So it will have value for municipalities, but the real target audience is helping landowners understand what role they is, what the process is, what are the right questions to be working with on asking on energy developers, what kind of partnerships are working together between landowners and energy developers, and really just helping them navigate this process as we're coming into local energy generation and distributed energy resources advancement as well. And that will be coming to a future Ontario Climate Caucus meeting.
Very good.
All right. Excellent. Thank you so much, Spencer. I will be sharing the links. I will be sparing the recording for the webinar, so that will be trying to I'll put it up on YouTube so that the other municipalities can access it. Municipal representatives from the Ontario Climate Caucus can access it.